and say thank you to the current board members. And if you're here as a board member, if you don't mind putting your hand up when I say your name. We have Larry, who's not here tonight, unable to attend. Robert, Ian, Mary, Mary's at the table. Dawn, and myself. Generally, we should have 7 board members. We started with a few more earlier this year, and they were unable to complete their time. Judy was one. Where's Judy? There's Judy. And I believe we had somebody else, but yes, that's right, Carrie. Yeah. Sorry, Carrie, you're right in front of me. So we did have 7 when we began, but now we only have 5. I'd also like to thank some of our email group and the people that have helped us throughout the year. They are Anne, who's behind me, Anita, Matt, Richard, Eric, Pirio, Gloria, Michael, Bob, Joe, and Colin. Thank you all for your words of wisdom in some of the questions that we've had. This year we did plan on having more than just issue-based communication. We planned on having a Pandozi Expo. Many of you knew about this. We had the planning in place for this, but COVID put a damper on it. So this is essentially what we would have done at the Pandozi Expo, but in a bit of a smaller form. All right? Developments from last year that we paid some attention to were the one on Groves and the one on West. Both are 6 stories. We are getting used to the fact that we have to densify, and we're not opposed to density, but these issues come forward from neighbors, and neighbors have some concern about the height and about the form and character of some of these buildings. The 2040 OCP is something that we have participated in. We've had several of our members participate in workshops for the OCP, 2040 OCP. Right now, OCP means Official Community Plan, by the way. Right now, we're operating under the 2030 OCP, which was signed in 2011. So 2021 should be the signing for the 2040 OCP that we will abide by. Well, it's just a guideline. I'm sorry. I don't mean abide by. Pardon me. Pandozi Waterfront Park is something that we've had on the front burner, and we've pressed the city to hopefully make that a reality, and I believe there is process. We do have the parks planners here tonight. And we've also paid some attention recently to some of the new developments. One is Park Retirement Home at the corner of Lakeshore and KLO. The Warman 9-story, which is across from Southgate. And the Stober, which, as many of you have seen the video of, is going to be 320 units. So tonight we have 3 guest speakers. The first we're going to introduce is Ryan Smith, who has graciously accepted the invitation to come and speak and tell us some of the things and how work goes with planning and development. And then after that, we will have Stefan and Robert Parlane from Parks Planning. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Ryan.
Thank you for the wipe down, Paul. I appreciate that. And for Tanya from the city for the mic tonight and the setup. It's fantastic that we have a strong neighborhoods team. So our strong neighborhoods team does grants for community-based projects, and it's an application-based process. A little closer?
Yeah, there we go.
So our strong neighborhoods team does a community grant process. And so if you've got a neighborhood event going on with your neighbors and you want to apply for some community financial support, you can do that through Tanya's team, and they'll review applications and consider funding your project. So it's one of those fantastic things that we've got going in our community now, and it's great that we can use it. So for the tent and audio video system tonight and the tables. My name's Ryan Smith. I've been the Director of Planning for a little over a year, but at the city now for 17 years, in Kelowna for 18 years, and I'm a second-generation planner, and I have a potential third-generation planner just sitting over here in the grass named Max. So he doesn't know it yet, but I followed in my father's footsteps. Maybe he will too, although I would advise him otherwise. Just kidding. In terms of, I'm going to touch on three things tonight, three different areas. I'll try and touch on some questions. I'll talk a little bit about current developments. Usually that's kind of a divisive topic, but it's one that kind of gets people out and gets people concerned with immediate changes to their neighborhood. I'm going to talk a little bit about the official community plan, and I'm going to talk thirdly about residents associations and their relationship with the city a little bit and building stronger relationships in the long term. So in terms of current developments, I just checked out a few of the questions that were put to me, and they're all sort of current development based. And Paul listed a number of the developments going on in the community. And one of the things that's often sort of misunderstood is that the community thinks that the planning department drives the type of development applications that come in and are considered by staff. Although developers will consult us, they come to us with development proposals, and we have to review and make recommendations on those proposals. We may be considering different things than a neighborhood or than somebody who's looking at it from a different perspective. So oftentimes we'll run into whether it's neighbors to a development or residents associations who have a different perspective. What we're looking at isn't the next 18 months or 24 months. We're looking at 20 or 30 years from now, and how does a development fit into what the city is going to be like 20 or 30 years from now? And that inevitably creates conflict. And firsthand, I see that. I have a development application going on right next door to me. I live 3 blocks from here, and there's densification going on, and I walk out of my back deck and I see 4 carriage houses. So my privacy gets impacted too, and I realize it's a change in a neighborhood. So I'm definitely not blind to that. I'm sensitive to that. But the reality is we're one of the fastest growing cities in the country for a city of our size, and we're a very desirable place to be. So we're going to have a lot of development pressure. And that's sort of a double-edged sword. There's good things that come of that. There's a lot of construction jobs. There's a lot of marketing jobs. All those spin-offs in the development industry are great for our community. But then you've got the negatives. You've got traffic. You've got tough parking in a desirable place like the Pandosy Village. So I understand the conflict that's coming in on development applications. When you look at Pandosy specifically, the last real planning exercise done for that sector of the city was in 1997. There's been a little bit of minor direction included in the 2030 official community plan, but there really hasn't been a comprehensive planning exercise for quite a while, so I'll touch on that in a minute. But what that means is, unfortunately, sometimes we're dealing with policy direction that's quite old. So we're looking ahead and saying, okay, should I ask my staff to follow something that's created 20 years ago, or should we look ahead and say, what fits best given that the city has to accept 50,000 people potentially moving here over the next 20 years. So that's what we're faced with when we're planning the center of this community. And council's given us the direction that rather than continuing to grow out and up onto our hillsides and do more subdivisions, they want us to accommodate more people in the central areas of the city. So that makes my job a whole lot tougher. It doesn't make my job easier. It means a lot more conflict with neighborhoods changing. And so it's not an easy thing to see your neighborhood change. I sat in a public hearing last night and heard impassioned pleas from a very tight downtown neighborhood on Costin at Richter who were concerned about all the development that was going on around them. And that neighborhood will probably have 1,800 more residents 3 years from now. So it's definitely not lost on me, and it's tough to accommodate this kind of change, and I get that. Having said that, we're not going to always agree. There's going to be recommendations that our planning department makes that are a little bit controversial. There's going to be questions that come up. I hear all the time, shouldn't we be getting something back for variances that developers ask for? And every community functions a little bit different. They have a different history with how they handle development applications. In Kelowna, it's always been a community. It's an entrepreneurial community, and the planning department's always been asked to be quite flexible when evaluating variances. There's some communities like West Vancouver, for example, where, or the district of North Vancouver, where I come from, where a planning department would rarely ever support a variance, and it might take them a year to even bring that forward to council. In Kelowna, we might do 70 or 80 development variance permit applications a year, and support of the 80, we might support 77 or 78. And lots of times it's for little things, sometimes it's for big things with development. There's a little bit of law that surrounds what a planning department can or can't negotiate for when you're considering something like that. And that's what we bear in mind at the sort of the highest level when we're evaluating those is, what's the law with what we're able to negotiate for? Maybe the better time to negotiate on some projects is at the rezoning. And so sometimes we've had a developer make concessions at the rezoning stage where a good example might be, improved or beefed up streetscape where the developer is going above and beyond to install special paving or extra street trees. And that's one that's it might slide through in the development process as an engineering requirement that's been agreed to, but it doesn't get highlighted. It's not one of those things that is considered, one of those really flashy improvements. It's not, public art, that type of thing that sometimes get a little bit more attention. I also saw the question about Pandozi as a gateway, and where are the gateway properties to the village? And that's one of those things that we talk about. There's downtown gateways, there's South Pandozi gateways, and our community plan hasn't picked out specific properties that form that gateway. So when you're looking at the south end, I would say definitely the properties at the south end of Richter, where we see the shore development. I would say the Stober property and the field of weeds just to the north of the shore property. I would call that the southern boundary. And then on the northern side, when you look at certainly the Leo's Video Mall, I would say is part of the northern gateway. On the eastern side, I don't know if I would call any of those property gateway properties. The main sort of traffic flow is north-south through that village. One of the things we are looking at are potential road improvements between KLO and the Richter. So on Lakeshore right now, it's a pretty wide road and it's not that inviting for walkers. And it was redone a few years ago, but the standard really doesn't jive with what the South Pandozi vision is. And so what we're trying to do is reimagine that a little bit. And I've had some discussions with some of you here about what that reimagining looks like. But to bring in, maybe narrow the road a little bit, wider sidewalks, better street trees, a more inviting feel. And then hopefully as properties redevelop along there, they'll bring the buildings right up to the street as well, which is something as planners we love to see. So so that kind of takes care of the development side. On the official community plan front, Paul said we're reviewing our official community plan right now. We're updating it to go to 2040. And over that time period between now and 2040, like I said, we're going to have to accommodate 50,000 more people. And right now, we're at a spot in that where council and the community have had some input into various aspects of it, but there's been a bit of a lull in that. While staff works out we consulted a ton of different groups over what kind of policies should be in the new plan, and staff are going through all of those suggestions and trying to reconcile them. It's a really tough job. There's a lot of different interests that feed into that. We've been doing more First Nations consultation, and we're trying to add a First Nations lens into this official community plan. We're also trying to add a greater equity lens into the plan. And what that means is better access to housing for different demographics in our community, for example. So it's been a challenging process. We expect more public consultation opportunities in November, December-ish. Probably if it runs as long as December, we would delay it until late January or February, but hopefully we can get into it for the month of November. So my staff are working towards that right now, but there's some uncertainties out there with gatherings and COVID. And while certainly we like the online, we get a lot of participation, I think we get better value with face-to-face consultation. So we'd like to do more of that if we can. So a couple other things that we have going on that are bylaw and policy related. We've got a tree protection bylaw that's in draft right now, and we're looking toward bringing that forward this fall. And one of the things that was always on my radar as planning manager was the fact that we seem to lose a lot of trees around this city, and it's one of the things that make this city great, or some of the streets with great trees on them, and whether it's on our streets or on private property. So we're going to try and do a better job over the next few years at protecting trees and requiring the planting of new ones. So I'm really excited about that. And one of the things that's come up with your residents association, again, is a plan for the new plan for the South Pandosy area. There will be a little bit of policy added to the new official community plan, giving some direction in that area. We're going to try and tackle a few things that I think are immediate concerns that I've heard through Paul and some of your membership, like building heights, for example. So trying to provide some additional direction there. But more detailed direction will have to come through a planning exercise that happens in the future. Paul, was it 2016 when you guys first asked? 2017? For a urban center plan. 2016. So 2016, we were just leading into the the Capri Landmark Urban Center Plan, which we thought would take a year and ended up taking 2 years and more than 2,000 hours of staff time from planning and engineering, our traffic engineers, our parks people, and was a really involved exercise. And on the heels of that, we ran right into preparation for the official community plan. And my policy and planning team that completes these exercises just isn't resourced to tackle a bunch of these major initiatives at the same time. They need to give all of their attention to the official community plan right now. On the heels of that, once we get that adopted next year and we undertake some of the implementation, we're going to be looking ahead at which plans we tackle next. And this remains a plan that's a high priority on our radar, and we would like to do it. It's not that we're trying to stonewall you or delay it. There's lots of neighborhoods with a lot of development pressure right now. Certainly the Rutland area would love a new urban center plan as well. The North End with Toko leaving would love some planning work done as well. And the Midtown area around Orchard Park Mall, staff believe that some more planning work needs to be done. So it's something we'll work on with council and set some priorities. So it's not off the radar. And unfortunately, if I could do more right now, I definitely would. But with these plans where we're talking infill development, they're really, really complicated. The transportation aspects, and the utilities, and the parks are way more complicated than planning a hillside subdivision. And hillside subdivision, you kind of map out the areas, environmental areas you want to protect, or the steep hillsides that have rockfall hazard that you don't build houses close to, and then the bulldozers go in and flatten out building lots, and you put in utilities in the ground, and dealing with existing utilities and existing road widths, and how do you widen things out, and how do you add new bike lanes, and where's the best place, for extra density, needs a lot more consultation, and it's a way more involved process. So definitely on the radar. And then in terms of neighborhood association activities, this is my third year here, second year speaking, and I'm always happy to come back or send staff and take questions before or after, or you can call me later this week or next week if you have concerns, and I do my best to answer calls. I get a lot from all over the city, and it's okay if you don't agree with me or I'm full of hot air. That's definitely fine. I'm happy to try and give you the city perspective on why things are going on, and I try and be frank about it. But we're not always going to agree. One of the things that I saw your residents association do that I thought was great was all get together and spend some time along Fowshaw Creek. That's a great initiative, and we encourage our residents associations to be doing more of that work that's getting the community out and together for issues beyond just fighting development. And you can do that, and that's fine. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that it's nice to see residents associations out doing other things. I'd also be willing to encourage my staff to come out and support some activities that you're undertaking. If you're undertaking something on the weekend, It's one of those things that I think giving back to neighborhoods that you're changing is important. So if we're given some notice and invited and welcome, then I'd love to bring my staff out to help. And we might be able to get half a dozen people or a dozen people to come and support some type of volunteer initiative in your neighborhood. We're always up for that as well. So in terms of building good relationships, again, I realize that sometimes they're going to be strained on development issues, and we'd love to keep building them in other ways. So that's out there, and it's sincere. Certainly, I say that this is my neighborhood too, and so I'd be the first guy to sign up if invited. And yeah, so I'm going to leave it there. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Or if you want to grab me before I go, I'm happy to. Yeah, what's okay. When are the upgrades coming to Pandosy, end of Abbott Street? Good question. I actually have no idea. It's something that bothers me as a cyclist, and especially riding with a little guy. I like the separated bike pathway. We've been focusing on the Ethel Street connection over the last few years and completing that. So we've been doing a block or two every year. And I'd like to see the city, when we start a project like that, complete it. So I'd like to see the city complete that project if we can before coming back. And I'd like to see Abbott, done all the way to Gyro, if possible, over the next few years. So I think that's got to wait for Ethel, though. With COVID, can the city cover its costs without raising taxes? So I'll give a little example of my division. So I've got a division of 75 staff that work for me, which includes the planning department, the building department, development engineering, business licensing, and part of the planning is long-range planning and planners that review development. And when COVID hit, we had 13 vacancies. And so what we've done is put all the hiring for those vacancies on hold. So we did that immediately to make sure that we weren't going to end up with a budget problem. So we were close to 15% in terms of being down staff, and we haven't begun to bring that up. We didn't hire any summer students this year, unfortunately. That's something we love to do across the division, and we weren't able to do that. And that's kind of the approach the city took, although in some areas, certainly in Tanya's division, they had to go and do a lot of layoffs. And so we had a lot of, whether it's lifeguards or active living and culture staff that were laid off. And so there was some tough times, and that happened pretty quickly after COVID hit. In terms of the larger, the city is a corporation, some of the things they also did immediately was ban all travel, non-discretionary travel, training, meal catering, all those types of things. And that actually adds up to quite a bit of money. So in terms of being financially responsible, I think the corporation, from what I've seen, has done a pretty good job. Our director of finance, she daily has been monitoring the property tax payments. And so it's I believe we're at 77, I think we're at close to 80% now property tax payment. I don't think it's something that we're going to need to go in and do increase property taxes for. In fact, we went in to the budget and actually tried to cut some projects out in order to lower the tax rate. And so I don't think you'll see the city or council coming back next year and saying, oh, we want the residents to make up our shortfall because we weren't responsible and you've got an 8% increase. I don't think that that's going to be on. This isn't a council who would accept that. So I would expect if there are any financial troubles this fall, if we have a second wave of COVID and we've got to shut down again, that would mean some pretty severe problems at the city in terms of requiring layoffs, and that's an awful thing to have to do. And I mean, I'm lucky in my division that this happened at a time when we didn't have to lay anybody off, and we were having kind of record construction levels. So I had building inspectors that still had full days the whole way through COVID, and they modified the way they worked a little bit. They worked from their cars, basically. They didn't come into the office. But yeah, I think that certainly the city's financial position isn't bad, but we've been lucky that we're a pretty financially conservative city. There's a lot of local governments in BC if a second wave hits who are going to be in a really tough spot. So yeah, I think we're lucky that we have both a director of finance who's managed this as well as she has, and we've been sort of quick ahead of the curve in terms of whether we're laying off people or whether we're keeping people vacant or just shutting down, all the travel and training, because that saved millions of dollars in the corporation right away, stopping that. So those are things that will go on till the end of the year. We're slowly in key areas with key staff beginning to do a little bit more hiring. There's a question way at the back. Yeah.
Okay, thinking about the connection from, well, I guess, South Kelowna over, but more specifically with bike lane and Cedar Avenue to Mary Beach. That's kind of the main bike route. It's the main route for all the kids to the school, if they're going to service school. It's super sketchy. So is there like an interim measure that you can take? And you make from Cedar Avenue, they have a speed limit of 30, and there's a paint kind of like, so that the lane itself is bike lane. So if you were driving there and you encounter a cyclist, they just have to wait for a couple blocks and they're going.
Yeah.
That's expensive, and it'd be something that you guys internally safety.
Yeah, we're always open to good ideas, and I don't have sort of our transportation planning and design team directly beneath me, but I could certainly just pass you my business card on the way out, and you could email me your suggestion, and I could pass it along to them, and you could get a little bit more feedback on that. But yeah, I mean, I certainly, riding around with a 5-year-old behind me, the more protection, the better. I totally agree.
There's a question on the, over there. There was a question. She had a question.
Oh, Erica? Question?
Can't hear.
We can't hear you.
This is Erica. She's the past president of KSAN, which is the neighborhood association near the hospital. So I think, Erica, from my standpoint as a neighborhood association too, I think the key thing is to start communicating, and we can all write to Ryan Smith, ryan.smith@kelowna.ca. We can write to anybody, we can write to any councillor. They are open. Any of the developers, we can write to the developers. They always have a contact person on their list when they put a DP in, but maybe Ryan can say more.
So one of the things that our team does when a developer comes in an area where there's a residents association that's active is recommend that you talk to a residents association and let them know that there is one. So there's some developers that do a lot of business in town and know that already. So it's the developer's choice though. We do have a public notification policy where a developer has to notify neighbors, and the scale of that increases depending on the size of the development. In terms of the long-term relationship, I would say that we need to meet more often and have sort of more clear objectives, and that's something I would like to work on. That's why I come to these meetings. I know that sometimes we're not popular, often we're not popular on the development planning side, but until I understand better some of the common concerns in the neighborhood, and you understand us a little bit more, and that trust relationships and that open dialogue builds, I think that we're going to continue to have challenges. So I mean, I would love to be more involved. I think we should be meeting more than once or twice a year. I think we should be meeting quarterly. And so I would say that open communication is really the first step, and respectful communication. And again, I have, while I've been doing this, a lot of years now, I've got a thick skin. I have 18 development planners or planners who work for me, varying sort of levels of experience, and some of them don't, and some of them take things quite personally and get really upset. And there's been processes over the last year that I've dealt with staff that are very upset and borderline on stress leave, and it really bothers me seeing that. And it's stuff that's really uncalled for in the community. And so I think that they're trying to do a job, and they're learning sometimes along the way as well. And it's a tough place to learn, Klona. It's a very, very busy community from a development perspective. I said that already, but it's also a community that's changing. We were a very, very entrepreneurial, conservative community, and we're becoming a more cosmopolitan community that wants tighter controls over planning and development that doesn't happen overnight. That's a process that happens over many, many years. And so we try and take more steps every year towards that. We'll be taking more steps towards through the OCP process, and we'll be taking more steps when we update our zoning bylaw as well next year towards that. So, we'll see more things potentially like, the clarity of density bonusing change. There was a question about, parking under buildings and developers getting density bonusing. Some of those things will be updated a little bit and improved as well.
Okay, I've got 10 seconds from our president. Ryan, I hear what you're saying, and I get the feeling that we're being paid lip service by the city and the planning department. We make some pretty serious submissions to the planning department, and I've presented myself to city council, and it just seems to fall on deaf ears. And the only guys who get what they want are the developers and the variance requests. We should call it the official variance plan, not the official community plan. So that's my 10 seconds.
One of the things I would say for all residents associations is that I think it's incumbent on you to spend some time working with council and building up credibility with council. And I think that there's, again, dealing with staff and building a relationship, that also needs to happen with council. And I think if residents associations can show council that they're doing projects in their neighborhoods that are really building neighborhood and improving neighborhoods beyond just complaining about development, you'll see a different attitude from council. I don't speak for council, but just someone who spends quite a bit of time with that group, that would be my observation, is that you need to build credibility with council. And so that's one way to do it, is through the projects you take on that are non-development related. And again, we're happy to try and support those. But yeah, in terms of the variances that get approved, it's one of those things that this is a culture of planning and development that changes quite slowly. So if you think that overnight there's going to be no variances to the zoning bylaw, sometimes a bylaw variance isn't a bad thing. Not all great buildings fit within our zoning bylaw. So sometimes a variance actually makes the building better and not worse, and isn't an indication that the developer is getting away with something. So a bit of a different way to look at that. If you choose to look at it and say, you know what, all variances are bad, you may need to be coming into us one day when you're building a house, because part of that house, for some reason, you made a mistake and it's over height, or your surveyor put the foundation in the wrong place. And I think that people appreciate that flexibility if they could apply for a variance and get a fair shake in the process.
Thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate you coming tonight, and I'd like to move on to Pandosy Waterfront Park and Robert Parlane and Stefan Johansson. Did I say your name right, Stefan? All right, close enough.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Robert Parlane. I'm with the Parks and Buildings Planning, so that's all the city-owned buildings that we're looking at. So can you hear me? Is that better? Okay. So first I'm going to start with the sort of good news, and then I'll hand over to Stefan. in previous years, when he's going to bring more good news. Sorry. Sorry. Sorry if that came out wrong. In previous years, our parks capital budget was typically in the order of about 2 to 3 million a year. So that's all new construction for parks across the city, whether that's playgrounds, neighbourhood parks, dog parks, waterfront like this, sports fields, etc. It also included the infrastructure renewal, so the replacement of irrigation and replacement of play equipment. So it's a fairly finite budget. And the city was growing faster than we could build parks for the city. So projects such as South Panzosi waterfront would just have to sit in the queue. And there was a long waiting list, for a lot of different parks across the city. There's a lot of frustration from a lot of different communities in terms of why weren't there neighbourhood parks, why weren't there community parks being built. And we worked with Paul a few years back trying to see if there was another way of funding this. That didn't succeed. But we've worked with council for the last, I'm guessing, probably 2 or 3 years now, looking at a different way of funding our parks. Trying to look at more holistically, looking for other sources of funding. So that included quite a few different options which have been implemented. The first will be the infrastructure levy that we all see on our property taxes. You see that as a line item, which is part of the property tax that is specifically for infrastructure projects. So that's across all the different cost centres, but that includes parks. So that makes a big difference in terms of having that money identified for park projects. The next one was looking at revenues generated within parks, whether that's concessions, parking fees, etc. That would now go back into funding capital projects within the parks. But the biggest one, which was just approved this year, is parks development and cost charges. For those of you who aren't familiar, DCCs or development cost charges are is a charge that's on every new house, every new condo that's built in the city to fund new infrastructure to support that growth. And previously, most other communities in BC would have a development cost charge for park development. We were quite unique in not doing that. So that was introduced this year. So that's in the order of about $7,000 per unit, which goes into funding parks across the city. So what does that mean for everyone here and our parks? Our capital budget now for parks is increasing, anywhere between $10 and $12 million a year on park growth, which is a huge difference. The other good news, I should say this is the first year of the DCCs. So we have a number of projects that were first projects coming out. So Rutland Centennial, we're finishing that one, adding in a washroom at Rowcliffe Park, a little small trail up in Gopher Creek up in Rutland, also a sports field up in the ponds, but of course South Panzosi, which we'll talk about, and that's the big one. Council went through the list of all the projects that we had in the DCC program, and they recognised that South Panzosi has been waiting for a long time. It was a very high-profile project, and it was a high priority for council to make that really the flagship project for the start of the DCC program. So that means it was funded. It's got $4.5 million of funding in this year's budget, which is coming directly from the DCC program. The other good news is that just as unrelated, we're talking about staffing and that. During the height of the COVID, the Parks and Buildings planning team, it was myself and one other person for a variety of reasons. I'm glad to say we've been able to recruit, and Stefan is now joining us. He's just joined the city 3 weeks ago. Yep. So he's actually now going to be the parks planner for this area, and is taking on South Panzosi as his main project. So I'm going to hand over to him.
Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me back there? Yeah? This is amazing. First presentation on a beach, and my first in Kelowna, so thank you. Paul, kudos to you and your board for an amazing turnout, so kudos to everybody. And in a COVID environment, well done to everybody. It tells me that this is an organized community, so that bodes well. To Robert's point, you heard him say Parks DCC. That is a game changer, and it really puts funding back into parks. Park spaces used to fight with transportation, sanitary, water, People like toilets to flush and water to go, so guess where the parks get prioritized and they sit and wait. So it truly is a game changer, and sadly it came out during COVID, and obviously the COVID world trumped all other news, and so the intentions and the whole program really was missed, but we're here telling you it is a game changer. Just a little bit of background, apologies. Any Albertans in the crowd? Right on. Right on. I'm newly transplanted, but I've spent 30 years of practice as a landscape architect and urban designer. And I've done the Edmonton River Valley system back in the 80s. I was one of the harbingers for the master planning. Anybody from Calgary? The River Walk and all of that, I was one of the harbingers for that. And when Robert offered me the opportunity to build in this community, you guys are light years ahead of everybody else. And these are major, major cities. And I don't say that patronizing. You are light years ahead. So it's not surprising that change and growth happens in a community of this size. So I'd like to talk about the Pandosy Waterfront Park. Obviously, I've read the newspapers and the background, and controversial, and right on. Communities do need to stand up and represent, and I see that happened. Going forward, 2014, there was two mandates from council. The first one was zone the properties into parks. That was done very quickly. The second one was position it in that 10-year capital plan. And you just heard Robert say that it got put in there, and we waited for funding, fighting with sanitary roads, etc. Fast forward to this year. As I said, COVID put money into the pot. Council made it a priority. Funds have been fast-tracked, and I'm happy to say that we selected a consultant. It went out to RFP just last month. We just selected a consultant 2 weeks ago, and literally in about 6 weeks, I'm gonna put the screws to them, but there will be an open house, there'll be a public information, and I know that you want feedback, and I know you want input, and that will be our opportunity. Fingers crossed, COVID gets better, and now that we know that things like this could happen, we may be doing an open house in a park. So in about 6 weeks, end of August, early September, look for that open house, look for that information session, and definitely let's get some feedback and let's do a wonderful park. There was a few questions forwarded to me, if you bear me some time. One of the questions was, tell me the progress. I just told you that. When will Pandosy Waterfront Park be built? Construction for Waterfront Park will occur in 2 phases. Phase 1 will start in May 2021. If you do the math, that's less than a year will be construction of Phase 1. Phase 2 will start in 2022 with completion anticipated in fall. Total cost, approximately $4.5 million. And that is a pearl park for this community. I'm trying to be conscious of time. How are we doing? Okay. It says that another question that was offered, these are questions that we received through various people, including Paul and the community. So I thought that instead of showing you no pictures, let's talk about some questions that I'm sure everybody has. What will Pandosy Waterfront Park look like? The initial phase of development includes demolition of the 7 city-owned houses within the park limits, and that's going to happen in November and December of this year, getting it ready for construction in May. Phase 1 of the park, again, we don't know all the elements. Let me back up. In park design, unlike urban design, we create open spaces. And open space is probably the most democratic thing we can do as a society. And once we start putting more and more programming in, that green space starts going. So I'm very, I'll defend parks for green space, but there's also time that parks need appropriate users. The worst thing, it's a COVID situation now, but the worst thing is to drive past a park knowing that developers have given money, infrastructure's gone in place, and nobody's using it. That tells me that programming's wrong, the user groups aren't linked up. So half of my job is to find appropriate users for parks. And I think the other thing that we need to talk about is think of various users. Who's got kids in hockey, soccer, right? Think about the number of users in there and think about the spatial requirements. How many fields, how many diamonds, how many arenas for those types of users? And so it's really a balancing act trying to get a user to activate the park, to make it look like people actually want to go there versus a desert and an unopened and unattractive park. So please bear that in mind. I see there was questions on here, Paul. So we are definitely working with user groups. User groups are cooperative. They know operating models need to change because this is a public park. But please also think about the flip side of that. The worst thing we can do is just have an empty park that nobody uses and it's not vibrant and it's not used. So please be open-minded. Please come to the open house in September, early September, end of August. And I am personable. I'd love to get to know all of you. I'm looking for a house, so, and I've got some, Pandozzi looks good too. I know that there's questions missing, but let's take those one at a time then. Thank you.
If anybody has a question, can you hear me? If anybody has a question, please put your hand up. Robert, you can speak without a mic. You're loud enough.
Sure. So I guess a couple of points. One of them during kind of the COVID when all the play structures were closed in all of the parks in the city. A lot of parents were trying to make, no? Okay.
I told you you'd need a mic.
Just with respect to COVID, a lot of the play structures that were shut down in March, a lot of the parents were wondering where to take the kids, and kids were looking in around Green Square, if you're aware of that area, by Casorso Elementary School and the future park right adjacent to that school. We noticed, the townhouse development there has gotten significantly densified, a lot of families with kids there, and a long time before that park's going to get developed. And so families got together and built a pump track in that field. And then, with 2 weeks later, it was quite popular. City came in with bulldozers and dismantled that park that the community basically pulled together. Just before the July long weekend, I was traveling to my sister-in-law's in Langley, and then we went across to Vancouver Island, and it became just apparent to me how we're competitive to other communities in this region for tourism and the quality of amenities and the parks we offer. And telling you, going into Langley, where I saw two very developed pump track parks in there with a parkour park, with a flexible tennis court, basketball court, hockey rink in one facility. It was a massive park. It was a magnet for families and kids. And we simply don't have the scale or the quality of parks in Kelowna. And I don't know kind of how we're going to fund it when we're looking at all these little parks we're trying to meet. And I'm not sure that scale and scope is being discussed. And then really, Parksville was like taking the cake. If you go to downtown Parksville, like they had a massive park as well with, amenities we couldn't even dream of. And you look at the play structures, they're quite simple, what we have in this area. So how do we next level the parks, and how do we make sure that we're providing some of these larger quality amenity throughout the city? Because we've got one in Rutland right now, but down here in the Mission, we are lacking a lot of major variations, right, for the parks and park users.
Thanks, Robert. I can, maybe if I talk to the first one, your first point. It was unfortunate the pump track was taken out. We have mechanisms in terms of introducing those. We have what we refer to as partners in parks, which we use quite a lot for such groups coming forward. And there is actually money available to assist with those sort of programs. But it needs to be done with the city knowing and with parks knowing So, liability and all those sort of issues in terms of making sure that it's actually safe and Canadian standards, etc. It's got to be designed to make sure it's safe. It's on city lands. It can't just pop up, unfortunately, in terms of a sort of program like that. We do have programs elsewhere where we're looking at partnerships with different communities, parents. We've had meetings just this past week, a group of parents looking to introduce a skateboard park and trying to get one of those world-class type skateboard parks. We are behind in terms of our skateboards when you look at other skateboard parks across the valley and other places. We also met at the same time the week before. We met with a bunch of teenagers, 4 teenagers, very keen, very motivated, inspired by their teacher. Started an online petition wanting a skateboard park. And we have lots of groups all the time coming to us, but 2 examples spring to mind sort of recently. So we're trying to bring the 2 groups together. Parents can help with fundraising. The teenagers can help with actually designing and making sure it's something they want to use. And we're trying to do it on a timeline that will meet the expectations of teenagers who have a very short expectation. They can't wait 3-4 years for budget to appear. So we have all of those groups, and we're constantly balancing between all the different user groups, whether it's skateboarders, BMX, even hockey, and all the other groups that come forward, tennis, etc. So we're constantly juggling between those. Certainly fire in suggestions and ideas. We're always open to ideas. Can't guarantee everything's going to happen straight away, but the idea of the Partners in Parks, it's a small fund that's available each year, anywhere between say $10,000 and $20,000 for a project. And we look to partners. So typically other groups put in sweat equity, or they do fundraising for the ideas, and it's a grassroots initiative.
If I may, that was sir, I forgot your name, but that was it, Robert. Deja vu. That was an excellent question, and I hope you heard the question. It was picking up the what do you call it, the park standard and the amenities. You just heard me say that it's really about connecting the users, and in one short month, there's so many users out there, and you're bang on. That's exactly what we have to do. It was a conversation I had with the Canadian soccer coach, and I asked him, Coach, how come Team Canada we can't qualify for the World Cup? He says it's because you got good athletes. I said, well, what's the problem with that? He says you don't have great athletes. You're good at volleyball, you're good at basketball, and that's really the key, is these parks need to have some great pieces and some great expressions. So your question is right. Each park needs base level, right? Playgrounds, things that people should be expecting. But then we need to put some sizzle, so your question and remark is exactly right. So that's what some of my mandates and some of my commitments will be for the Parks Department.
So there's one other question that was on the sheet here, which is about Maud Roxbury Park, just over here. It's suffering some damage from the water, and there used to be a log boom out there that would protect the shore, and we have that same problem at Pandosy Waterfront Park. There's riprap there. I understand the riprap comes out. I really don't know, but that in combination with the design of the park, is the design going to be what we saw on the website last year?
So yes, we have a lot of problems along our waterfront in terms of erosion. Just different storms. The high water in 2017 caused a lot of damage to the shoreline. We saw it here in Kinsmen. So this year we actually have budget for 6 different locations across the city where it's particularly badly damaged that we're looking at. Maud Roxbury is one of those. Any work that we have to do on the shoreline is governed by the province, so we have to go through extensive permitting with the province, which is, unfortunately, it's never a fast process, but we have to be sort of very thorough in terms of the engineering that we're doing. Generally, what we're trying to do, we've all seen that the riprap that we see. You mentioned it down in Pandosy. It was the solution in the past. It's very easy and quick and stops the erosion. It's not very user-friendly though. It doesn't really help make the waterfront usable. What we are trying to look at is what we refer to as bioengineering, and you'll see it in some places. It's done very successfully over in Peachland. You'll see some small examples down in Sarson's Beach, sorry, I forgot, whereby you're using logs and other plantation buried into the shoreline and actually using natural tree planting to secure the shoreline. The other one we started doing, you may have seen in the press this year, we're trying to get away from, in the past we've always cleared away the logs and the debris on the beach as soon as it happens. Everyone likes nice clean beach. But actually in the spring when we have that high water, those logs are actually protecting the sand. The logs actually kill the energy of the wave and actually stop the sand washing away. And the difference is quite amazing. If you see the logs left on the beach, you see the sand accumulate. So we're trying to leave debris on the beach for a little bit longer, as long as we can before the summer season. So that's been a bit of a change. Encourage any homeowners, if you have waterfront property, to try the same. I know it's our inclination to tidy it up and make it look nice, but the logs are nature's way of protecting the shoreline. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so further to Robert's comment, specific to Pandosy Park, very much like different homes, different parks have different topographies, different views, different aspects. With Pandosy, obviously it's got different location in the lake. For those of you who are aware, it's fairly shallow. The eddy and the confluence of Foss Creek, water quality sometimes isn't the best, and so there are portions that will be perhaps you can play on the water, or portions that might cantilever with armoring. The best answer is it's going to be a hybrid of everything, but the bioremediation that Robert was talking about is nature's always the best solution, and it is really about reinventing and just finding those solutions again. And from a project management perspective, it's also stretching that construction dollar so that we're actually making this the park that it should be. So I think the answer to that, it's ongoing. You heard him say that it's coming. With Pandosy, obviously the design that the consultant will be coming up with will dictate permitting, and obviously that obviously will be further down the line than, say, Mox Roxbury.
No, can I ask one more question? Really quick here. There's some people in our neighborhood that are still a little bit upset with having a paddle center. Sorry, Hugh. But they feel it's a private club. I know from Hugh, because I've talked to him, it's not a private club, and it's not, we can go there. So can we just speak to that and make sure that everybody's clear that that is actually public space?
Okay, thank you. So yes, we're in process of having discussions with the paddle center. We're conscious that the model is changing and will be changing very rapidly for them in terms of the operating model. It'll change from just being, properties. So you can't hear me? Right. Yeah, it's fenced in. It's got two lines of chain link, and you can't see all the great activities that happen in there. A lot of people don't know that there's thousands of kids going through doing programs there every summer. So the paddle center's been great to work with. It's a really enjoyable process in terms of what we're trying to do is look at a new operating model. The park is opened right up, all the chain link goes, and the shoreline will be fully accessible. So we're trying to look at what does that mean if you've got people loading kayaks and surf skis, etc., while the public's walking through. How do they maintain safety? How do they have a safe class if you've got a group of kids there in a public park? It's not impossible. There's lots of examples elsewhere where it's done. It's just different from how it is at the moment. But the intent is very much to open up that shoreline so it becomes a paddle center in the park it's not a compound.
Okay, so you just recalled me talking about finding the right users for the right spaces. Think about Pandosy Park. They're no bigger than a residential lot. Yes, there's 7 in a row, but it's very good. It's going to be a very dense park. It's going to be a lot of shared uses. And the other thing too, you heard Ryan speak about people. It's hard enough for people to think a month out, let alone 10 years or 5 years out. And we all do it. We put the blinders on and we say, this is the property line, and rightly so. Everybody, okay, they're in 3 lots, but the houses are coming down, and that property line is going to be blurred. And we are challenging the paddle center, and they have been very cooperative, and they also know that their model needs to change. It needs to contract at night, and it will expand during the day. But again, it's that vibrancy. They're not going to be throughout the park. They're out there, right? So this is a user that is actually not even using very much space. Again, think about those macro, micro scales I talked about, soccer, hockey, baseball. Think about how much room they take, and a paddle center that we're trying to work with a very condensed footprint. So Hugh, I'm going to save the paddle center the dignity. They definitely want to be expressive. They are open to being more public. Again, I know that I'm going to save some gold in those hills, and I'm going to let them talk specifically to that. But I want to get the message out that definitely they are cooperating. They've heard that criticism, and please, you will see something in late August, September, verifying that. And please, again, feedback is welcome. Okay, so we are working on that. Thanks for the question.
Thanks everybody for questions. We're gonna let our guests go. If you have more questions, they are always available. All right. So thank you. And thanks, Robert. And so I'd just like to move forward with the rest of the meeting. Most of you are all members now that you've been here. There are some notes on here. We've learned an awful lot about how to interact with the city. They are very open. We just have to communicate with them. And the best way we can communicate is by having a very large group of neighbors who receive the newsletter, are members, and then we are respected by council. In the past, we've had only a couple of members, and they have spoken for what they considered as the whole neighborhood, yet there was not this many people out. So thank you all for coming out at my call for this, so thanks. We do have a Facebook page. Please go there, and all of the contact persons with the city council is here. Keep in mind that if you have a question for city council, don't just write to mayor and council, write it to each and every council member, because each and every council member does not read the mayor and council correspondence. All right? So if you have some issue, please bring it up. Erica knows that, right? All right, so now we just want to move on. I've got the minutes of the last year's annual general meeting is printed for all you to see. Can I have a motion to accept the minutes? Joe, do you mind writing down who does this? Thanks a lot. Yeah, who? And seconder, Robert, all in favor? Thank you. I've got the treasurer's report there, which I've prepared as well, which is that we have something like $400 and some odd there. Sorry, don't have it in front of me. By the way, yeah, what do we have? Yeah, we've got $1,130. A lot of that is because I haven't claimed a lot of expenses, and a lot of our members, like Michael, has been putting money in and paying for things all these years and never claimed it back. And so there's a lot of donations that we give to the group. So please, the membership is only a token, and I appreciate it. All right, so we have 5 board members now, and I'm hoping they'll all stick around, and we can have 7. So, Robert, you're okay to stay on for another year? Yeah. Mary, where'd you go? Mary, another year, you're okay? Where's everybody? Ian, where's Ian? Ian, you said you were ready for another year, right? Thank you so much. Dawn, there's Dawn. You're okay for another year? Of course. If you're elected, right? and Larry is not here, but I know he'll stay. And I've been on this thing for a long time. I've sort of taken the reins from Bob Whitehead, who was amazing at what he did, and Michael Neal. So, I mean, I still have them as my confidants and talk to them all the time. So I appreciate their input. So without further ado, do we have anybody else who would like to help us out with about 7 meetings in the year and correspondence and talking about stuff? We've got a few already. Any hands out there? Might just be the 5 of us again, guys. No? All right, if there's nobody else that is wishing to be on council or on as a director, can we have a motion to accept our current 5 as the 5 going forward, please? Joe, thanks. And a seconder? I don't know your name. Oh, sorry, Gwen. And all in favor of the 5? Thank you. That gives us authority, you know. So based on that, I will call this meeting closed. Keep in mind that you can write to me at info@klona.ca, and I try to put newsletters out. If you have anything you want in the newsletter, please send it to info@klona.ca, and we will get it in there. So I hope you all enjoyed the meeting, and thank you so much for coming out, and thank you so much to the city for bringing tables in the tent and the speaker system. We couldn't have done it without them. So thank you so much, Tanya. Strong neighborhoods.